for how governments should conduct themselves in cyberspace. Including a commitment not to engage in the cyber theft of intellectual property for commercial gain. And as we head into global climate talks, all G20 countries have submitted our targets. And we've pledged to work together for a successful outcome in Paris. Of course, much of our attention has focused on the heinous attacks that took place in Paris. Across the world, in the United States, American flags are at half-staff in solidarity with our French allies. We're working closely with our French partners as they pursue their investigations and track down suspects. France is already a strong counter-terrorism partner, and today we're announcing a new agreement. We're streamlining the process by which we share intelligence and operational military information with France. This will allow our personnel to pass threat information, including on ISIL. To our French partners even more quickly and more often because we need to be. Doing everything we can to protect against more attacks and protect our citizens. Tragically, Paris is not alone. We've seen outrageous attacks by ISIL in Beirut, last month in Ankara, routinely in Iraq. Here at the G20, our nations have sent an unmistakable message that we are united against this threat. ISIL is the face of evil. Our goal, as I've said many times, is to degrade and ultimately destroy this barbaric terrorist organization. As I outlined this fall at the United Nations, we have a comprehensive strategy using all elements of our power military. intelligence, economic development, and the strength of our communities. We have always understood that this would be a long-term campaign. There will be setbacks and there will be successes. The terrible events in Paris were a terrible and sickening setback. Even as we grieve with our French friends, however, we can't lose sight that there has been progress being made. On the military front, our coalition is intensifying our airstrikes, more than 8,000 to date. We're taking out ISIL leaders, commanders, their killers. We've seen that when we have an effective partner on the ground, ISIL can and is pushed back. So local forces in Iraq, backed by coalition air power, recently liberated Sinjar. Iraqi forces are fighting to take back Ramadi. In Syria, ISIL has been pushed back from much of the border region with Turkey. We've stepped up our support of opposition forces who are working. To cut off supply lines to ISIL's strongholds in and around Raqqa. So, in short, both in Iraq and Syria, ISIL controls less territory than it did before. I made the point to my fellow leaders that if we want this progress to be sustained, more nations need to step up with the resources that this fight demands. Of course, the attacks in Paris remind us that it will not be enough to defeat ISIL in Syria and Iraq alone. Here in Antalya, our nations, therefore, committed to strengthening border controls, sharing more information, and stepping up our efforts to prevent the flow of foreign fighters in and out of Syria and Iraq. As the United States just showed in Libya, ISIL leaders will have no safe haven anywhere. And will continue to stand with leaders in Muslim communities. Including faith leaders, who are the best voices to discredit ISIL's warped ideology. On the humanitarian front, our nations agreed that we have to do even more. Individually and collectively, to address the agony of the Syrian people. The United States is already the largest donor of humanitarian. Aid to the Syrian people, some $4.5 billion in aid so far. As winter approaches, we're donating additional supplies. Including clothing and generators, through the United Nations. But the U. An appeal for Syria still has less than half the funds needed. Today, I'm again calling on more nations to contribute the resources that this crisis demands. In terms of refugees, it's clear that countries like Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan, which are already bearing an extraordinary burden, cannot be expected to do so alone. At the same time, all of our countries have to ensure our security. And as president, my first priority is the safety of the American people. And that's why, even as we accept more refugees including Syrians, we do so only after subjecting them to rigorous screening and security checks. We also have to remember that many of these refugees are the victims of terrorism themselves. That's what they're fleeing. Slamming the door in their faces would be a betrayal of our values. our nations can welcome refugees who are desperately seeking safety and ensure our own security. We can and must do both. Finally, we've begun to see some modest progress on the diplomatic front, which is critical because a political solution is the only way to end the war in Syria and unite the Syrian people and the world against ISIL. The Vienna talks marked the first time that all the key countries have come together as a result. I would add, of American leadership and reached a common understanding. With this weekend's talks, there's a path forward negotiations between the Syrian opposition and the Syrian regime under the auspices of the United Nations, a transition toward a more inclusive, representative government, a new constitution, followed by free elections, and alongside this political process, a ceasefire in the civil war, even as we continue to fight against ISIL. These are obviously ambitious goals. Hopes for diplomacy in Syria have been dashed before. There are any number of ways that this latest diplomatic push could falter. And there are still disagreements between the parties, including, most critically, over the fate of Bashar Assad, who we do not believe has a role in Syria's future because of his brutal rule. His war against the Syrian people is the primary root cause of this crisis. What is different this time, and what gives us some degree of hope, is that, as I said, for the first time, all the major countries on all sides of the Syrian conflict agree on a process that is needed to end this war. And so while we are very clear-eyed about the very, very difficult road still ahead, the United States in partnership with our coalition, is going to remain relentless on all fronts: military, humanitarian, and diplomatic. We have the right strategy, and we're going to see it through. So with that, I'm going to take some questions. And I will begin with Jerome Cartillier of AFP. Question: Thank you, Mr. President. 129 people were killed in Paris on Friday night. ISIL claimed responsibility for the massacre, sending the message that they could now target civilians. All over the world, the equation has clearly changed. Isn't it time for your strategy to change? President Obama, well, keep in mind what we have been doing. We have a military strategy that is putting enormous pressure on ISIL through airstrikes. That has put assistance and training on the ground with Iraqi forces. We're now working with Syrian forces as well to squeeze ISIL, cut off their supply lines. We've been coordinating internationally to reduce their financing capabilities. The oil that they're trying to ship outside. We are taking strikes against high-value targets, including, most recently, against the individual who was on the video executing civilians who had already been captured. As well as the head of ISIL in Libya. So it's not just in Iraq and Syria. And so, on the military front, we are continuing to accelerate what we do. As we find additional partners on the ground that are effective, we work with them more closely. I've already authorized additional special forces on the ground who are going to be able to improve that coordination. On the counter-terrorism front, keep in mind that since I came into office, we have been worried about these kinds of attacks. The vigilance that the United States government maintains and the cooperation that we're consistently expanding. With our European and other partners in going after every single terrorist network is robust and constant. And every few weeks, I meet with my entire national security team and we go over every single threat stream that is presented, and where we have relevant information. We share it immediately with our counterparts around the world, including our European partners. On aviation security, we have, over the last several years, been working so that at various airport sites not just in the United States, but overseas we are strengthening. Our mechanisms to screen and discover passengers who should not be boarding flights. And improving the matters in which we are screening luggage that is going on board. And on the diplomatic front, we've been consistently working to try to get all the parties together to recognize that there is a moderate opposition inside of Syria that can form the basis for a transition government. And to reach out not only to our friends but also to the Russians and the Iranians who are on the other side of this equation. To explain to them that ultimately an organization like ISIL is the greatest danger to them, as well as to us.